Hi, I'm Rich Roberts. I'm a medical doctor, a doctor of biophysics, the previous CEO and president of a pharmaceutical company, and this is my 5th YouTube video in this coronavirus series. Briefly, I'm not going to recap all the things that you've heard. That's not how I see my purpose being. My purpose on YouTube is to bring you ideas, perspectives, thoughts that you will not have received anywhere else. And I do want to say I greatly appreciate all the positive comments from people, the questions, and also the subscribers. I'm really grateful. I have no interest in making any money on this. I don't make any money on this. I don't want to make any money on this. I'm doing this strictly for you. Today's topics are Einstein as in Albert Einstein, the new projections from the government, hydroxychloroquine, China, ongoing studies of other drugs, and acceptable bigotry. First, Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein was generally considered to be the most brilliant individual of the 20th century. He was famous for discovering his theory of special relativity. Then he developed his theory of general relativity. I could explain those sometime if you like. He was also instrumental in the development of quantum mechanics in the earlier part of the 1900s. And he did receive the Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect, which, I don't know if I want to go into all that. That light, which is energy and not mass, in fact, acts many times like the energy is compacted into little bundles, little particles that will, when they hit an atom, if the particles of energy is of the right size, it'll bounce an electron off, and that's called the photoelectric effect. That's actually how photoelectric cells work, or solar cells work. And he did receive the Nobel Prize for that. I'm bringing up Albert Einstein in the context of coronavirus for two reasons. One is sort of just a funny story that someone called me, because a somewhat well-known guy, because he's home and there isn't much action. So he called to say hello. And also, this is going to get into the government projections where I want to explain to you, and it's true about everywhere in life, if something doesn't make sense, you need to think about it. You may get the answer, you may not get the answer, you might have tentative answers, but if things don't make sense, you have to think, what you're being told, does it make sense? So this friend of mine called. He's in his 70s, his age. He had worked for Linus Pauling. Linus Pauling won 2 Nobel Prizes, one in chemistry and the other in the Nobel Peace Prize. He's the only person ever to win 2 Nobel Prizes solely by himself without sharing it with others. He was a brilliant chemist, and he and his wife were personal friends of the Einsteins. This friend of mine, many, many decades ago, had worked for Linus Pauling and had a relationship with Linus Pauling and his family. If you read the history books about Albert Einstein, you'll find that there's something that really doesn't make sense. Here is an individual who is possibly the most intelligent person to live in the 20th century, and yet he flunked out or failed at his courses in elementary school in Germany, where he was born and raised. Now that doesn't make sense, and that's an interesting quirk in history. The trouble is, it doesn't make sense, and it's not true. What my friend told me is that Linus Pauling's wife, Mrs. Pauling, had told him that Albert Einstein considered that report to be hysterical. He said that in Germany, they didn't get graded A, B, C, D, F. They got graded 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And A, the writer of this story, the original writer, A would be 1, B would be 2, C would be 3, and you think F, failing, would be 5. And he failed every course. But Albert Einstein said to Mrs. Pauling, who said to my friend, exactly the opposite was true. 5 was the top grade, 1 was failing, and he got 5s in everything. Hey, it actually makes sense. So I don't know how else to get it out there, an interesting quirk of history, and don't believe what you read about this in the history books. Which brings us to the issue of the new projections from the United States government for the projected number of deaths from coronavirus. The government has announced that although they originally thought that somewhere between 1.5 million and 2.2 million Americans would die from this due to social distancing and quarantine, with the rate at which people are getting sick starting to reduce. They now project that somewhere between 100,000 and 240,000 Americans will die from this, which, as catastrophic as that is certainly much less than 1.5 to 2.2 million. But this doesn't make sense. And here's the reason why. If people were dying because of a lack of medical care, a lack of ventilators, then mitigating, meaning spreading out the rate at which people are going to get sick, would make sense in terms of reducing the number of deaths. In other words, you have less numbers of people getting sick at any time, spread it out over a longer period of time, and then you at least have enough ventilators as people end up on ventilators and either survive or don't, but then the ventilator gets free for the next person, versus everybody hitting at once and there are not enough ventilators for everybody. But the question is anybody dying from coronavirus due to a lack of medical care, according to Dr. Birx, who heads up the coronavirus task force for the United States government, for the White House, no one has died due to a lack of medical care, at least thus far. And what we are hearing all over the medical community is not that people are dying because there's not enough resources to treat them. And yes, doctors and nurses are getting run ragged. They're working around the clock. Many of them are getting sick. Some are dying. And they really are heroes that are stepping up to the plate in the time of this national need. But no one is dying right now due to a lack of medical resources. And yet people are dying. They're dying because of what this virus is doing to them. That it's causing their lungs to be damaged, and then leading to a damaging of the organs and death. And in medical science, the medical practice doesn't have any way to stop that right now. We don't know what to do. As a matter of fact, I'm hearing a lot of contradictory information coming from very reputable sources. The need to get more ventilators has been a major national emergency. And yet there are some pulmonologists, these are experts at using ventilators and treating the lungs, are saying that ventilators might be doing more damage than good. They're legitimate pulmonologists. It's only some of them. There are other pulmonologists that think that ventilators are necessary and doing a good job. We don't know. The way this virus is acting inside the bodies, it's causing people who are infected with the virus, and some who have infiltrates into their lungs on X-ray, they don't even know they're sick. And others, the oxygen in their blood is dropping and they don't even realize it. They don't realize the oxygen level in their blood is dropping and they're being found dead. Then there's others that are breathing, they're gasping for air, they're short of breath, they're very, very weak, and they're being treated, but it looks like their own innate immune system is either going to kill this virus or not. It's not clear how much medical doctors can do. We can give support, fluids, oxygen, but it's just not clear how much the medical intervention is actually changing the course of the disease. So using, in the first video that I did 14 days ago, I told you that using the straight out mortality rates of people by age group, according to what we saw in China, and using then the number of Americans alive with those in those age groups, that projects out to about 5 million deaths. And then when you add in all the other comorbidities, diabetes, hypertension, chronic respiratory diseases, cardiac diseases, cancer, when you add in all of those, the potential number of deaths in the United States could be 15 million. So what I want to ask you is, what has changed? Yes, the rate at which people are going to get sick is going to slow, but we already know that attempts to contain this virus haven't worked. That's why we're having the catastrophe that we have now. That's what's so vicious about this virus, besides the fact that it sickens and kills people, but also the way it spreads, that there's a long incubation period that could be as low as 3 days, but up to 14 or even more days that people are walking around not knowing they're infected and infecting others. So using mitigation, social distancing, isolation, quarantine, we can reduce the rate at which it spreads through the population. But I haven't seen anything to indicate to me that almost everyone in the country is not eventually going to get infected with this virus. Now, if a cure is found, if a chemical cure, not a vaccine, because vaccine is going to come to market way after everybody's been infected by this. Everybody, I mean virtually everybody. But if a chemical is found, whether it's hydroxychloroquine or one of the other antiviral drugs or whatever it would be, if a cure is found, then that changes everything. Then we'll say, yeah, instead of having a huge slope of people, everyone getting sick and somebody dying and then going down, by having it a more gentle slope and stretching out the number of people who get sick over time. And then if a drug is found to work, bang, you stop the virus in its tracks. And then a large number of people will be saved. But given these new numbers, I don't know how they can be projected to occur. Just like the Einstein thing, this doesn't make sense. If you want to tell me that, well, given other models of diseases, and these are just modeled out, and then the rate at which the disease is spreading right now, okay, I got all that. But the fact is, some people are not going to comply with quarantine or social distancing. You see it on the news. You see people on subways in New York and other areas of the country, people in public transportation, and some people congregating. You've seen a lot of college students on beaches in Florida during spring break. And there's real reason to believe that there are some people who are going to carry the virus with them for up to 4 weeks before they even get sick. So now, unless you're going to say, okay, we think that through social distancing and quarantine, we'll be able to get the rate of infection down so low that containment will work. In other words, if anybody pops up with this disease again, this infection, then the government will jump in to everywhere they've been, everyone they could have contacted, and then try to get them all quarantined to sort of snuff it out before this virus can restart. But there's no reason to believe that we can actually do that. We tried it, we couldn't. I don't think anybody else, any other country has been able to do that. Maybe China has, because they can put in draconian measures. They can ship people off to a prison camp for years if they don't comply. And I'm not advocating that, but just know that these numbers, the new numbers, and I want to be optimistic, but I'm not going to lie, given the way this virus functions, given the way this virus attacks people, given the way this virus incubates and gets spread long for days or weeks before someone even knows they have it, it's hard to imagine how the vast majority of Americans are not going to be infected by this virus eventually. And when they are infected, unless we can show that the medical interventions are really truly saving people, then I don't see how that death rate is going to change. Lastly, after using all the social isolation, social distancing, quarantine, once we have the rate of the viral infection down to a very, very low level, I think the idea is that the people who are not infected, had the virus and are now free of the virus, will be let out to go out back to work and go into the public. I'm thinking that it should be exactly the opposite. The people who have never been infected by the virus, they're the ones who should stay in quarantine. And those who had been infected, whether they got sick or whether they were able to fight it off, those are the ones that should be able to be let out and go back to work. That way, we won't have to be concerned that they're going to infect anybody. But if you let the people who've never been infected go back to work, then you just need one or a few infected people who didn't keep to the quarantine to go out and see these people, see the unaffected people, infect them, and start the cycle all over again. Okay, hydroxychloroquine. There were a number of comments to my previous YouTube videos where people said, yes, the physicians are not seeing any dramatic results in people who are very sick getting cured with hydroxychloroquine. But a lot of doctors, the commenters say, are seeing that their patients who are taking hydroxychloroquine before they get sick are not getting sick. Sorry, that's a real problem. I'm going to give you a classic example, which is multiple sclerosis. Totally unrelated to coronavirus. But there's a long history of people claiming they've been able to cure people with multiple sclerosis using this drug or that therapy. But if you read the medical books, you'll see that multiple sclerosis goes into remission by itself anyway in 90% of the cases. Oh, well, this doctor says that every patient he gave hydroxychloroquine to didn't get sick. Okay. Well, most people, about 80% of the people infected with coronavirus don't get sick. Two more topics. First, I want to talk about China. I said in an earlier video, my original video, that I do not believe, I'm not a conspiracy theory type of guy. I don't believe in conspiracy theories. Did the United States land on the moon? Well, just look at the fact that our competitors, the countries against us, China and Russia, both of them acknowledged that we landed on the moon. That should be proof enough for anybody. In other words, if we didn't land on the moon, they would know it and they'd be telling it to everyone. We landed on the moon. Come on, get off it. 9/11, was that some conspiracy by the United States government or some other government? Oh, come on. It's Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden. They took credit for it. They were proud of it. It's their people that did it. They tried to do it again. They tried to do it before 9/11. It's just utterly ridiculous. We all know who did it and why they did it. Jeffrey Epstein, did he really commit suicide? Well, okay, that one reeks of something wrong. In this day and age, I think it was last year, 2019, in a federal prison in Manhattan, the two guards just happened to be asleep at the same time that the cameras don't work, at the same time that he commits suicide when the illicit operation he was running has a lot of damaging information on very powerful people. So let's put that one aside. I'm not so sure, and I think a lot of people are not so sure that conspiracy theories aren't correct. But now let's look at the evidence that this coronavirus is not something that occurred naturally, but that it comes from a biological weapons laboratory in China. And I'm going to repeat what I said previously, my first video, then give you some new information. We know that there is a biological weapons laboratory in China, about 4 miles away from Wuhan, where the first infection broke out. Number two, we know that the Chinese doctor who tried to report the infection initially was silenced by the Chinese government and he was reprimanded. Now, if China had an outbreak of a potentially lethal contagious disease, they would want to jump on it right away and tell everybody and make sure it doesn't spread. Unless China didn't want anybody to know about it because the existence of this virus was damaging to the China government's secrets in some way, like it's a biological weapon that escaped the laboratory. Then China tried to blame this virus. They said the origin of the virus was in a wet market, that it came from infected bats that were eaten by Chinese people. The problem is, when international experts went in and tested the bats, they didn't find any coronavirus. So then China said, well, it actually could be in the snakes or the alligators. And international experts tested about a dozen different species and didn't find any coronavirus. Number four is there are a number of American politicians who have been saying for the last couple of weeks that China is at fault and China is liable, which means money, for this catastrophe that they caused. And the politicians are saying that's because China didn't warn the world early enough. Sorry, I don't believe that at all. That doesn't make sense. Not warning the world early enough when an outbreak of an infection occurs does not bring multi-trillion-dollar claims onto China. And I think that is the way this claim by American politicians is their way of signaling potentially that American intelligence and Western intelligence, Western countries' intelligence services know that this was a bioweapon that escaped the Chinese laboratory. But they can't say so, especially during the time that this catastrophe is hitting. We don't want to deal with that issue. What I would say is that trying to blame the Chinese for not reporting the virus earlier is just a placeholder for our claim. But the real information, the real basis for the claim that it came from a Chinese biological weapons laboratory, I strongly believe that's going to be revealed in the not too distant future once we're more towards the tail end of this epidemic. Lastly, and this is the new piece, and I'm not the first one to reveal it, but I just see how this fits in with this being a biological weapon, is the head of the World Health Organization, the head of the WHO, just recently complimented the Chinese government on how quickly the Chinese government was able to provide the DNA sequence, or in this case the RNA sequence of the virus, to world authorities, world governments. Okay, so it's a compliment if it was an incredibly agile scientific feat by the Chinese government to isolate this virus and sequence it so quickly. But it's not such a feat if the Chinese government created this virus and the scientists were working with the sequence of this virus and the sequences of other viruses in order to splice into this virus's sequences other contagious medical damage functions. So taken together, I don't believe it's a grand conspiracy, crazy theory to think that, in my opinion, I think it's about a 98-99% chance that this is truly a Chinese biological weapon that somehow escaped the laboratory. And oh, by the way, China tried to say it was an the American military that released it. That's another piece of evidence. That's ridiculous. But when you're guilty, some people try to blame others for the thing that they did wrong. I think we're going to find out that this is a Chinese biological weapon. And being that that's what it is, China is going to be financially liable for multiple trillions of dollars of damages. And hopefully the Western countries, led by the United States, will stand up for these claims. And if China is not willing to work out some full reparation when this is all done, then we really, as a country, and hopefully as Western democracies, need to start on a plan to build up other Asian countries where we can help start to build the infrastructure there and replace China, and do this in countries that aren't taking a predatory approach against the United States. The last topic is about acceptable bigotry. And let me explain what I mean by that. And if this is no longer about the science of coronavirus or the financial implications of it. So if this is not of interest to you, then you can please stop watching the video at this point. There are some people that were concerned that Chinese Americans would bear the blame from other Americans for this virus. To me, it's totally ludicrous. Now, but that's not what I want to talk about, by the way. But let me just say that it's a big world out there. And with the internet and electronic communication now, you'll be able to find some racist somewhere, which, by the way, generally these racists are just a bunch of misfits. You look at them, they're a bunch of dropout misfits. And thank God they're a small group. And Americans don't, as a whole, Americans don't embrace bigotry. They don't embrace racism. And that's been a major contributor in the greatness and the success of this country. So the idea that Americans would hold Chinese Americans responsible for this, to me, is utterly ludicrous. And again, you'll find on some neo-Nazi website, you're always going to find, schizophrenia exists in about 1% of the population. There are enough crazies out there. You could be a Charles Manson and you're still going to get your 12 followers or whatever it is. But for the vast, vast majority of Americans, it's just utterly ludicrous the Chinese Americans bear no responsibility, no connection to this disease coming out of China. But there is one bigotry that apparently is acceptable now. So acceptable that it's done openly by mainstream people, done openly by members of government at the local level, and that is anti-Orthodox Jewish bigotry. So here's what's happened. I live in Lakewood, New Jersey, which is a community of a little over 100,000 residents, but it includes 70,000 Orthodox Jews. And we tend to have large families, on average about 5 or 6 children per family, so our population is growing. As we've started to move into the neighboring communities, which are just the next block over. It's not like you have to go over a bridge or go on a highway. You're just driving along a road, and if you don't see the sign, you wouldn't know that the next street is actually in the next community over. So as Orthodox Jews have started to move into those communities, there's been a tremendous amount of backlash. The township of Jackson, New Jersey, has passed laws to prevent Orthodox Jews from opening up synagogues, prevented Orthodox Jews from having religious schools or having dormitories with those schools, prevented us having a thin little string that can't be seen unless you look up and concentrate and look for it, to allow women with carriages or people in wheelchairs to go outside on the Sabbath. And the Jackson Township employees and elected officials have engaged in surveillance of Orthodox Jews praying in our homes. Unfortunately for Jackson Township, as part of a lawsuit, there was a Freedom of Information discovery, and there's tons of emails on the Jackson Township email system where they documented the surveillance they were doing, counting the number of Orthodox Jews going to pray in a home, counting the number of cars, staking out Orthodox Jewish homes before the Sabbath. And if you want to read more about that, I'll put the website in the description below. It's familiesforjacksonjustice.com. But this type of official anti-Orthodox Jewish bigoted activity is reflecting an overall racism or bigotry against Orthodox Jews in these neighboring communities. Now with the coronavirus, that has now enabled the most hateful or paranoid or conspiratorial types to make outrageous statements against the Orthodox Jewish community. For example, Lakewood and several of these towns are in Ocean County. The Ocean County Fire Marshal, John Pasola, on his Facebook postings talking about Lakewood, meaning the Orthodox Jewish community where I live, said that, excuse me for looking down, I'm going to read it. He said that we are trash, we're dirty ones. He says we're filth. And he wrote that our town should be turned into, quote, a hole in the ground, end quote. And they're saying, he says this, and others are doing things because of rumors that go around that we're breaking quarantine. Now I do want to say, even though 99+% of Orthodox Jews in Lakewood are holding by strict quarantine, like any place else, you're going to find some people are just not complying. In one of the neighboring towns here called Tom's River, some of the neighbors saw an Orthodox Jewish young man getting onto a school bus. So they called the police and reported that our schools are open in violation of quarantine. So the Tom's River Police Department stopped the bus and searched it. Well, on our local Orthodox community website called thelakewoodscoop.com, we have the videos from that bus. The bus was delivering school lunches all around town to the students who can't go to school. The bus was filled with lunches, boxes of lunches. There was an Orthodox Jewish driver who had on a full, contamination suit to avoid contamination, face mask, and the guy delivering the packages also was wearing a face mask. But that didn't stop the rumors from flying that our schools are open, which they're not. In another neighboring township, a man was arrested for making terroristic threats against the Jews of Lakewood, again for the same reasons. So he was arrested. He's now been charged with second-degree terroristic threats. So not only is this bigotry unseemly and irrational, but it's also based on falsehoods. I'll give you an example. The New Jersey State Police Colonel Patrick Callahan put out a statement after surveying Lakewood that said the vast majority of Lakewood are complying with the executive orders on social distancing. And there's a councilman from Edison, which is a town far north of here, named Sam Joshi, who put out a social media post condemning Lakewood for not complying, meaning the Orthodox Jews here, for not complying with the social distancing and quarantine requirements. But I have to give Sam Joshi a lot of credit, because he was invited by an executive here in the community to come down and to tour the community. And he issued an apology afterwards. He said, Lakewood's on shutdown. The synagogues are all closed. The schools are all closed. The streets are empty. And he was just responding to what he was hearing on social media about us, which are just lies. So I give him a lot of credit for acknowledging, once he got the facts, that he was wrong. I also want to give credit, and now I'm a strong Republican, but to our Democrat governor, Governor Phil Murphy, he has stated the following: an overwhelming percentage of folks in Lakewood are doing exactly the right thing. And he calls out the hate and the anti-Semitism. And he's really been very great on just rejecting bigotry of any form. By the way, the lights went off in the fish tank, which is it's 10:15 p.m. at night, in my area. So anyway, this is the anti-Orthodox Jewish bigotry that seems to be an acceptable bigotry. It's being done at the government level, which you can see, like I said, on familiesforjacksonjustice.com. You can see all the documentation there, surveillance and harassment of Orthodox Jews praying in homes. By the way, we pray 3 times a day. We can pray in an office, in a parking lot, in our homes, in synagogues, in wedding halls, wherever we are. But not in Jackson, New Jersey. They want to cite us for violations if we're praying in a home. If we were in those homes watching football, getting drunk, or watching pornography, that would be okay. But if we're praying, then no, that's not okay. Like I said, they were caught red-handed with their own emails showing that they're doing surveillance, laying down dragnets to count and harass Orthodox Jews going to pray in homes. And the national news media basically doesn't pick up on this. I've tried, others have tried. It seems to be an acceptable bigotry. And now, with the coronavirus and all of these false accusations against our Orthodox Jewish community, it's just, we're then getting the result of bigotry and hatred, and some people going towards violence. So all I can say to that is the vast majority of Americans reject that type of bigotry, and I'm very grateful to our forefathers for the protection of the Second Amendment. Thank you for watching.